Listen to lectures on different dimensions of literary studies and the trends in literary research. And as usual, today, we have one of the most eminent resource person amidst us, Professor T. Marx, Professor, Department of English, Pondicherry University, a renowned critic, translator, um, and he has translated books from Tamil to English in the recent past. Many of you might be knowing that. And as a speaker, you all might be knowing that he speaks about those literary texts which problematize the issues pertaining to the voiceless people, the people who live in the lower strata of the society, who are subjected to injustice, who are subjected to all sorts of oppression, and those who were not able to express such kind of oppression. And today, he's going to talk on a very interesting topic, hydropoetics and hydropolitics. So it is people who are familiar with the professor might be knowing that he always is doing like this. He will be talking about such things which are entirely new, which require some deep thoughts to comprehend. And in that way, today, Professor will be talking about the representation of issues related to the problem of water. And like all of you, I'm also eager to listen to Professor's lecture. And on behalf of the Department of English, on behalf of the participants, I welcome you, sir, to enlighten us on the topic of hydropoetics and hydropolitics. Welcome you, sir. Sir, the mic is muted, sir. The mic is muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Paddu, for the nice words.
Thank you, sir.
Respected head of the Department of English, Professor Nagaraj, my friend Dr. Padmanabhan, Dr. Ashita, Dr. David, Dr. Vinod Kumar, and Dr. Kasirajan, and my dear learned faculty members who are participants of this FDP on recent trends in English studies. And more importantly, my longtime friend and fellow academician, Professor S. Prabhakar, who is also here with us among the participants. Very good morning to you all. And as Dr. Padmanabhan pointed out in his intro, I wish to speak something related to water as not as a natural resource, but as a commodity. Not just a commodity, but also a factor which is used or misused to discriminate people from fellow members of the community. So in many ways, there is a lot of scarcity among the researchers and also the academicians with regard to water-related themes, or water as metaphor, water as symbol, especially in the Indian context. So I wish to take up that specific topic for today's discussion. When Paddu was, when Paddu called me to invite me to deliver a talk in the FDP, on recent trends in English studies. He didn't ask for the title immediately, but then he gave a date and I simply accepted. Later, when I was thinking about on what topic I can deliver a talk, um, I was repeatedly I was repeatedly listening to the messages coming in the mobile phones and all kinds of electronic gadgets, regarding the pandemic. You should wash your hands frequently. So this kind of the exercise or the habit of washing our hands frequently with the hand sanitizers. I thought I just imagined very wildly if there is no water at all to wash our hands, what would happen to people during the pandemic times. And I was simply reminded of my own college days when a very, very stalwart teacher was trying to explain S.T. Coleridge's famous poetic lines from the rhyme of the ancient mariner. Water, water everywhere, and nor any drop to drink. This, though it was kind of philosophical, religious, metaphorical water he was referring to, I relate that water to more to a physical water, and the world is going to face severe acute water scarcity in the near future. And right now we are having only below 2% of drinking water across the nation. And there are predictions about water wars in the place of oil wars in the near future. So in this context, let me begin my lecture on hydropoetics and hydropolitics in literatures across the world and more specifically in the Indian context. Literature is the reservoir of our dreams and desires, our fears and frustrations, of our yearning for meaning and justice, of our longing for company and community, and at times our own yearning for solitude and solace, of our voracious pursuit of the beautiful and the peaceful. To put it so very curtly, the predominant purpose of literature is to render in words the nobility and splendor of life on one hand, and the travesty of humanity on the other hand. So, in the process of reflecting life as it is, literature uses the resources of life quite symbolically and metaphorically, and in many other ways. As the images of land, wind, and fire play such a prominent and recurring role as a metaphor in literature, the image of water as a metaphor is hardly surprising because humanity cannot just imagine surviving without water. So, water sustains life and at times destroys life. And throughout literature, water keeps representing not just of birth and death, but of enslavement and liberation. So it is water in the form of the river and sea that has triggered the mind of others across the world. Though the sea keeps eternal its whisperings around the desolate shores, as the romantic poet John Keats sings in his poem On the Sea, those heard melodies of the turbulent seas and the unheard melodies of the placid mid-sea have been translated into verses, into verses, into fictions, into many other forms by others for centuries. From starting from Homer to Hemingway, from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner to the Thakali Malayalam classic Thakali Shivashankaran's Chemmi. So when we trace the history of the connection between water and human life, it's as early as human evolution itself. As Derek Walcott, I technically begin my lecture by quoting Derek Walcott, in one of his poems, "The Sea is History." When people ask series of questions to Derek Walcott, where are your monuments, your battles, martyrs? Where is your tribal memory? And he replies, sirs, in that grey vault, the sea has locked them up. The sea is history. The sea is history. When the elite historiographers, when the elitists ask for the history of of the people who emerged from below, the peasants, the working class, the answer is it is in the tribal memory, and the memory is in the sea. The sea has locked them up, and everything is concealed beneath the sea. So since water is absolutely essential to human existence, it is an important component of human history as well. And hence, the history of human civilizations is almost synonymous with the geopolitics of water. This is my first point. So, the history of human civilizations is almost synonymous with the geopolitics of water. I mean, politics, both international relations and local relations, as influenced by aquatic factors. So what we locally refer to as, in the case of a national dispute, like interstate river water dispute, we call it as Nadi Neer Prachana in Tamil. But when it comes to an ordinary local one dispute, we call it Vaikal Tagarar. The terms, which we use to refer to a nationwide river water dispute and a local water dispute. Yet it is rather shocking that how little attention water as a resource, as a theme, as a motif, as a metaphor receives in historical accounts, at least till the early 1990s, the period of the adoption of the LPG model of governance. As we all know, human beings have generally settled near convenient sources of fresh water, and it is obviously the reason for the great ancient civilizations' drew sustenance from water bodies, more specifically the rivers. Like the Egyptians, centered their civilization on the Nile. The Mesopotamians emerged from the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Chinese civilization was situated close to the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers. Water facilitated relatively the rapid transportation prior to about 1850s, 1850 CE. So, though road transportation was made available from the early decades of the 17th century, the transport options remained severely limited even for the wealthy sections of the society. In an attempt to limit highway robbery in England, the Highways Act 1663 enabled the rulers of the respective regions to levy what you call tolls on their parts of the Great North Road, and the first turnpike was erected at Wade's Mill, Hertfordshire. Now you can relate it to the modern states implementing the toll plazas. The modern states are adopting the same toll plazas, unfortunately, which proved to be worse than reason behind, the intended purpose behind installing the turnpikes, what you call the toll plazas. Now the toll plazas proved to be worse than the road robberies. In the era of exploration and discovery from the late 15th to the 18th centuries, Europeans explored all the major oceans and seas. Water was also thought to be an essential aspect of imperialist expansionist policies of the empires. This is my second important point. Though the imperial forces invaded the geographical spaces, the colonies, with the mission of sharing bread and wine, it was water which led them to accomplish their intended purpose of exploiting the resources of the colonies. So they would have invaded the colonies in the name of bread and wine, but it was water which helped them in many ways to accomplish what they actually intended. So in the post-industrial societies too, this is a pre-industrial society phenomenon that water led, water in a way helped and guided the colonizers to capture the colonies, to enslave millions and millions of people. But in the post-industrial societies too, water was an important source of power and remained an essential component in all kinds of manufacturing processes. An interesting feature of the post-industrial societies is that water, which was regarded as the fountainhead of human life, got concealed as a hidden factor in human history, or the history of the world. For example, the way in which water was concealed in light. Scientists who invented light said, initially they said, light, the source of light, right? The light comes from waves, or lights emerge from wave-like, or lights come as they didn't get any kind of vocabulary in that specific context, and they rather use the word it is wave-like. What is light? If you ask a scientist of that specific period, they said light is wave-like, and people could not understand the relationship between the term wave-like and light. And when asked further, scientists answered it emerges from a substance called ether. Later, Einstein disproved it, saying that there was no such substance called ether. But meantime, even before that, many people started using the ether in both in the physics and in the literary context. Shakespeare, you must be knowing how Shakespeare has used ethereal skies and ethereal in many texts. So the thermal power projects. Later we understand that it is exactly wave-like, and that's a substance in saying or relating light with waves, because it is the waves that create the electricity, the thermal power project. So for many, it quite literally got concealed, hidden from sight. So water was conveniently concealed of its identity, but it takes some other forms. For example, in traditional toilets, we pour water, drawing it from buckets. But in Western toilets, water is concealed and is seen only as we flush a toilet, or simply in malls. In malls, in the toilets, in the sophisticated malls, by simply proffer our hands before the sensors. So increasingly in modern times, the tendency to view water not as a basic natural resource to be shared commonly by the members of the society, members of the community, but a commodity which can be owned and stored, controlled and monopolized. This is the problem with the modern usage of water as a commodity. Every living thing, every plant, every animal, and every human being needs water to stay alive. Perhaps next year it's water that the human body depends upon for its very survival. So water was such a common good for all ethnic groups. In the religious systems, water was given a prominent place. As we all know, God created man from earth, a piece of clay, which required water. So a handful of mud was mixed with water. So water is already there as an essence in human body. Then after molding a man from a piece of clay, he blows air into the clay. One can notice the importance accorded to water by Christianity in the rite of blessing and sprinkling of holy water in the Sunday congregations, masses, where a priest comes with a vessel of, salt water and saying, "Grant, O Lord, we pray that wherever this mixture of salt and water is sprinkled, every attack of the enemy may be repulsed and your Holy Spirit may be present to keep us safe at all times." Perhaps during the pandemic times for the last 3 months, this specific activity is missing, and every Christian becomes unchristian because as per the norms of the Christianity, as per the tenets of Christianity, if a Christian, could not take the communion subsequently for 3 months, he becomes unchristian. So the pandemic has catapulted all kinds of religious beliefs as well. Coming back to the religious perspective of water, the first mention of water for Judaism and later Christianity is found in the first verse of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. I keep an emphasis on the last phrase, on the last segment of this specific quote from Genesis, the verse from Genesis. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. You have to consider the spirit and matter as one and the same. The Spirit of God was moving over the face of the water. This is the first and the only place where God was moving over the identity of God was referred to as moving over the face of the waters. Possibly because Genesis was written in a period when water was your only chance of seeing your image, what you looked like. So there were umpteen number of references in all kinds of religious belief systems. The eschatological studies also, like the life after death. You have a river called River Lethe, which in the Greek mythology, the river Lethe is a river of forgetfulness. Once somebody dies, the person is moved beyond skies, and there is a river called Lethe, and the Hades. And once you take a dip, an unholy dip, then you forget who you are, and then comes the day of judgment based on your good and bad deeds. In the Hindu mythology also, in the Hindu religious text also, especially in Garuda Puran, you have a reference to Vaitarani river, which lies between the earth and the infernal, what you call Narakam, so the realm of Yemen, the Hindu god of death, and it is believed to purify one's sins. But there's a difference between the Hindu river, that lies between the earth and the Naraka, the Vaitaranya, and the Greek mythological river called Lethe. That's a difference. In the Hindu mythology, while the righteous see when they are taking a dip in the river, the righteous could see that river filled with nectar-like water, but the sinful see it filled with blood, filled with pus, filled with a lot of other disgusting elements. And in Islam too, the water from, as we all see, all these Muslims are, visiting Mecca, and they are encircling a common place called Kaaba, the black stone. It is nothing but the water. There is a well called Zamzam well. The water from the Zamzam well is what is much more important. And in the Greece, in Greece also, you will find placards everywhere. These are all these things prove that how mankind was giving or attributing a kind of prominence to water as a resource. In Greece, if you visit Greece even today, you will find placards everywhere reading, "Water is precious, drink wine." So, and in space researches, you see all kinds of, with the advent of science and technology and advances, scientific advances, all space researchers invariably all over the world relate to any kind of research in space or tracing its hydrology first. So when man enters the moon or any planet for that matter, the first and foremost search among the researchers, among the scientists, is tracing its hydrology, whether you will get water in that space. So with the Western modern style, right, with the Western modern style and with the construction of the metros and the cosmopolitan cities, the water management system, which was hitherto taken care of by the whole community, right, I mean, together, was replaced by corporations. And now the corporates decide the consumption of water. How much water should be consumed by each and every member of the community or the society is decided and charged by the corporations and by the corporates now. So till then, water was a shared resource. Even in toilets, water was very sparingly used. If you trace this is an interesting area in the field of aquatic studies. If you trace the history of butt wiping in the annals of anal hygiene, for thousands of years, stones were the go-to wiping objects. Just rub some rocks on your rear end and toss it into the space, right? And no wonder it was called the Stone Age. And one fine morning, Dr. Prabhakar called me and was referring to his struggle in translating a specific sentence from Sivagami. நம்ம நிலைமையெல்லாம் பேண்டகளிலும் தொடச்சக்கண்டு. So this kind of a reference you can find using stone as a wiping object. You find a lot of such references in the subaltern regional texts in India. And the ancient Greeks still used stones to wipe. And like our Keladi excavation, some of these wiping stones which have been discovered with people's names inscribed on them, and which suggests that the Greeks would wipe their asses with the names of their enemies. Even today, I remember my mom carrying the picture of a political leader whom she doesn't like at all, and wiping off my daughter's home. So this specific habit, is still prevalent in all villages. You can see people tearing the picture of somebody who they don't like and using it for some other purpose, using it as a toilet paper, a tissue paper. So the Romans, a relatively sophisticated group. The Romans used a sponge on a stick, what we call tersorium. To sanitize this contraption, the pieces laden sponge was soaked in salt water. And which is about as effective as washing your hands with the present day sanitizers. So communal bathing was there in our own days, in our own boyhood days. I could still recollect communal bathing formed an important part of citizens' lifestyles in our society. Not just for washing and relaxing, but also as a place to socialize and gossip. So the Chinese are widely believed to have invented the toilet paper. And during the colonial times, there is a shift. The elites were wiping with the dried out corn cob, and the peasants were using a popular wiping mechanism included leaves and a handful of straw. There is a class distinction even in this specific tool which is used for wiping the post defecation wiping. So it was Gandhi who recommended the dry latrines with a bunch of straws, but then in this mechanism too, the manual scavengers were used to pull down the dried fecal waste into the pit to convert it into usable manure. So that the intention of Gandhi would have been very right, but that also unintentionally or unwittingly exploited the manual scavengers to a larger extent. So it was not viewed as a solution for the manual scavenging or an alternate for manual scavenging. So the early issues of the Farmer's Almanac and even calendars came with holes drilled into the upper left-hand corner to hang on in the open defecation places for convenient read and then wipe access. So mornings they'll read something in the hangout in the hanging sheets, then they'll use it for wiping. So the same pattern is continued today, but not in the open defecation places, but in our snack stalls, bhaji stalls and all. Dragging something using your left hand and parceling something using the right hand. So the dichotomy and the thin veneer that disconnects the rich and the poor is that, to put it more, class-oriented, tissue paper for the rich and old newspapers for the poor people. Anyway, in all these toiletological studies, one can understand the citizens' priority for water preservation over their personal hygiene. So light and water were never used to discriminate people in organic societies. It was only with the Western influence that discrimination was done using the natural resources like light and water as well. I give you a very casual example. When we used country chicken, the country chicken was cleaned by not with water but by smoking it raw. So no water was required. Now a specific data says to clean a broiler chicken, it requires 32 liters of water. 32 liters of water is required to clean a broiler chicken, whereas a country chicken can be cleaned just by smoking it raw, and then you can prepare the curry. So with the privatization of water, with the commodification of water, the Pepsi and the Coca-Cola and the umpteen number of corporate giants proved that all the five elements can also be marketed. This is the concern of all of us, and more importantly, writers who are the most conscious part of the setup are supposed to write about. It is a part of our glorious tradition, inviting guests only with water. Whoever visits our house, we used to offer them a cup of water, and in some cases, we offer them a buttermilk. You might know something. In 1957, the Natural History Museum declared the Thames River as biologically dead. News reports from that era describe it as a vast, foul-smelling drain, exactly like our Coom River of Chennai. So, since there was a strong diplomatic, aesthetic link between the Buckingham Palace and the River Thames, as Swan could not survive in that specific foul-smelling drain, the River Thames, and as Swan is the metaphor of British imperialism and royalty, it posed a very specific challenge to the ruling class of the Buckingham Palace of Britain. So within 80 years, you just imagine, within 80 years, the River Thames was given life. Today, if you throw a small sheet of paper, even a bus ticket into River Thames, you will be sued. I tell you, my dear friends, even the fountain is not part of our culture. In our culture, we have the tendency to look above to see rain so humbly, because man knows that if it doesn't rain, his survival will be at stake. He won't get food. Famine will strike him. Seeing it so very close and parallel to our own standing is the concept of the West and not of the indigenous cultures. Indigenous cultures looked above to see rain, looked above to see waterfalls. It was initially used, even in the Western context, it was initially used to fetch river water into cities. But then the present water fountains you see in cities is a Baroque style of fountains using water in a basin-like structure and jetting it out upwards. Here is where the capitalists started extending it to vested interest, extending it to personal gains, like the concept of theme parks, where you have artificial waterfalls and fountains, where water becomes a commodity, a saleable commodity. It's more like when people take bath in the artificial waterfalls in theme parks, when people derive a kind of inspiration from the fountains where water is pumped upwards, and when these corporates are trying to exploit the specific aesthetics of the unsuspecting consumers, it's more like, I'm reminded of a Malayalam folklore. It's more like the fool in a Malayalam folklore could drag the white clouds, mistaking it for a cow, and tying them to the cattle shed he was trying to milk them. In the Indian context, almost all the rivers became habitats of human beings. And in the post-Vedic period, the Brahmins started settling in the river banks temporarily because Brahmins were never permanent settlers. So the Brahmins started settling in the riverbanks temporarily, but then after once they planned to settle down permanently, they planned in such a way that they constructed temples and encircled the temples. So they designed their residences around the temples so that they can't be forcibly evicted for religious reasons or for political reasons. Because when there is a temple, you cannot evict them. So that is one reason why if you visit Ramanathapuram of Tamil Nadu, can anyone say how many agraharams are there in Ramanathapuram? Not even a single one, because there is no river at all. But you go to Kumbakonam, it's full of agraharams and agraharam streets. So in some forms, in the Indian context, the Hindu devotees and the agoris, more specifically the agoris, started practicing a different style of disposing the dead bodies, the corpses. In 1915, Gandhi went to the Kumbh Mela of River Ganges, a triennial festival that rotates between four Indian cities. That year it was held in the Hindu holy city of Haridwar in India's north on the bank of the river Ganges. After seeing millions of devotees take a dip in the sacred river, in the supposedly sacred river, in attempt to wash away their sins, Gandhi later wrote in Young India, I had gone there full of hope and reverence, but while I realized the grandeur of the holy Ganga and the holier Himalayas, I saw little to inspire me in what man was doing in this holy place. And he further says, to my great grief, I discovered insanitation, both moral and physical. There is defilement of the mighty stream, even in the name of religion. And he concludes it by saying, thoughtless, ignorant men and women use for for natural functions the sacred banks of the river where they are supposed to sit in quiet contemplation and search for God. They violate religion, science, and the laws of sanitation. Quite contrary to this kind of practice of throwing dead bodies into river Ganges and polluting the river Ganges, beyond polluting it with plastic waste, you can find traditionally trees were planted in the indigenous communities. Trees were planted along the bunds of the water harvesting structures, be it a pond or a lake or a river, and even in the gardens, even in the fields, where they continue to exist. And these have medicinal values, and they also clean the water of impurities in the same way as alum. Even alum was used in rural areas. The village barber used to use alum in the place of aftershave lotions. And in city saloons, water gusher was used before and after the shave. All these things point out that there was a very systematic water preservation mechanism, though water was plenty in the rural areas. Just because water was flowing in plenty, people never misused it. People never exploited it. People never wanted to monopolize it. So the Vedic period identified that water and the human bodies in the Hindu social system are not merely physical entities. Rather, water has been recognized as a primordial spiritual symbol. So the caste system, a product of post-Vedic philosophy, ascribes states of ritual purity and pollution to human body on account of caste and also of gender, which Indian women should know. It is a first of its kind discrimination that water has been recognized as an instrument to determine the rigors of socio-ritual purity and pollution of human body. There are essentially, I tell you, my dear friends, there are essentially two ways to bring about a condition of purity in India. One is to distance yourself from objects signifying impurity. If you in the book by S.C. Dubé, that is a reference to how the Tiyas and Pulayas were kept away from the Nambutris when Nambutris visit their fields. They needed to maintain some yards distance when they see a Nambutri Brahmin. This is one specific thing: distancing oneself from objects signifying impurity. And the other is to purify oneself by things recognized to have the ability to remove your dirt, remove your pollution, for which water is the most common medium of purification, not just physically but also spiritually. This is what you find in Christianity, this is what you find in Islam, this is what you find in all other religions. Water is always used as oblations. So the tool for oblation. So the Rig Veda identifies water as Pratishta, the very foundation of this universe. The concept of purification in early Vedic text was essentially spiritual rather than moral and physical. So the act of bathing was considered intensely spiritual, and it was believed that physical acts of imperfection was removed when you take a bath. So according to Vedas, it was not the act of taking a bath itself, but the coming into communion with the sacredness of water, not as a commodity, but as a divine source. So the post-Vedic periods, right, need to be accused of institutionalizing the water-related social inequality. The Chinese traveler to India and a historian, Fa Hei, writes about how in a public place the Chandalas had to give notice of their approach by striking a piece of wood to warn others to avoid contact with them. Even in the Dharma Shastras, water was identified as a medium to purify the pollution obtained through the Shudras. The Manusmriti also elaborates how water and food cooked in water, offered or touched by the Shudras, was polluting. This is one reason why certain objects which were meant for cooking, were looked after with utmost care by the topmost layer among the caste hierarchies. So it was stated that when Shudras touch a well or any other stagnant water source other than the river, the source and the water is highly polluted. So according to Manu, the lawgiver, Shudras were likened by him to a living symmetry. I quote, a living symmetry. Women, worse, on account of their bodily secretions during their menstrual cycle and immediately after childbirth, were identified as polluting regardless of their caste. So during this period, all of these restrictions detailed for the Shudras were exercised equally on women also. Those touching menstruating women or touching women during the first 10 days after delivery, after childbirth, were also considered as polluting. Water was ascribed as a medium to purify all these forms of pollution. Water, you can find these things more in water, Hindu mythology, and an unequal social order in India. An important study made by Deepa Joshi. And there is a strong connection between the political and the social aspects of river water sharing in India. Politically, India shares all major river waters with its neighbors. And all those neighbors are not actually good neighbors now in the present context. All the major river waters which India shares today are not good neighbors because there are no good fences. So India happens to be an upper riparian state, and Nepal-like states happen to be the lower riparian states. So once the lower riparian state is full and inundated, then you get the upper riparian state gets water. This is the problem of India. This is one reason why people keep on telling or crying for the linking of all rivers in India. It has its own defects as well. I don't want to get into that. Likewise, in the community context, in the local context as too, the river water was consumed fresh and first by the upper caste and then by the lower caste. You find two different banks, one meant for the upper caste and one meant for the Vannans, the washing community. And there is, from this specific thing, emerged the claim, the self claim made by Brahmins that postmodernism is not or is never a Western concept, but it has been there in the Indian Sanskrit tradition as well, with the saying, you never ever enter the same river again, which is considered as the crux of postmodern thought. uh, Keeping these things aside, there have been continuous struggles to share the water, the river water, water from the public tank. Notable example is the Mahad Satyagraha or Chaudhar Tail Satyagraha was, it was a Satyagraha led by Dr. Ambedkar in 1927 to allow untouchables, Dalits, to use water in a public tank. That is a wonderful graphic description after this specific incident written by Srividya Natarajan and S. Anand, titled Bhimayana. You can perhaps read or see the graphic novel on this specific incident. And I'm reminded of one more poem by Ravi Kumar, the Tamil poet, who talks about this specific water politics in just two lines. Whenever there is a Tamil nationalist struggle, the Dalits are left out. The Dalits are taken, the Dalits are included. But when it comes to inter-community dining and other egalitarian issues, the Dalits are excluded systematically. He has summed up this specific tendency of the Tamil nationalists just in two lines. The Tamils are united, but Tamilers are divided. Even today, you find the two Tamiler system in most of the rural hamlets where untouchability is practiced. And in many cases, when there is opposition to the use of two tumblers, the neo-untouchability follows with the use of disposable cups. So you need not touch the cup which was sipped by somebody else. So in K. Gunasekaran's Baliyadugal also, you find the history of water as a tool of subjugation of the indigenous people, the Dalits. In Baliyadugal, the story revolves around the village community where the village was deprived of rains for a long period, and all the villagers meet a Hindu priest asking for some kind of expiation measure. And the priest suggests that the one who is unruly, to use the concept of biopolitics or the construction of the prisons by Foucault, the deviant element should be identified, and there should be a human sacrifice. That person who is considered as a deviant element in the whole setup, or one who challenges the tenets set by, or the discriminatory tenets set by the Hinduism or Brahminical Hinduism or the Vedic Hinduism. That person should be sacrificed so that the village will get rains. As long as you question the tenets of religion, you won't get rains. This is a curse of the god. So in K. Gunasekaran's Baliyadugal, a person is picked up and he was about to be sacrificed. And towards the end, there is a twist, a feminist twist to the whole plot. He asked the whole crowd, "You want somebody to be sacrificed? So in my place, I wish to sponsor my wife to be sacrificed." And he escapes that specific thing. And this specific human sacrifice has been there in many traditions and more ruthless in our own traditions. Roman Basu, not a prolific writer, in his Outcast also refers to this kind of water as a discriminatory factor, or a metaphor, as a metaphor used to discriminate people from fellow members of the community. And towards the end, the merging of a brass pot in a well was indirectly signaling the death of the protagonist. So that is an imaging process based on the popular imagination, which is far-fetched from reality. As you see, many of our Indian writers, all of them invariably, have written about water, especially the rivers and the sea. But then there is a stereotypical approach towards the representation of river and the seas, and also the metaphorical representation of symbolic representation of water in their text. Mostly it is based on a kind of imagination which is far-fetched from ground reality. The poem "The River" by A.K. Ramanujam, which speaks about a drought, which affected Madurai, and you can compare it with Langston Hughes's "The Negro Speaks of Rivers" and find out the attitude towards the river by both the poets A.K. Ramanujam and Langston Hughes. And you can compare Thakali Sivashankaran's Chemin and Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. It's Sivashankaran's earlier text was a very socialist text, but this is a modernist text where he tries very meticulously to emerge as a modernist writer, and then Chemin has its own ending, which is, as you all know, that with the consummation of two lovers, interreligious lovers, the sea becomes angry and it swallows Padani. So how a man falls a victim for the wrath of nature, the sea, which was actually overcome in the work of Ernest Hemingway, the protagonist of Ernest Hemingway. And again, in the guide, R.K. Narayan has used Raju. You all know the ending of it's a very common text prescribed for all our university students. And the poem by Keki and Darwala, The Gagra in Spade, and Water by Bapsi Sidwa, where though it was used as a metaphorical, the title was, the novel was titled Water at the metaphorical level. There are references to water in Bapsi Sidwa's imagination. Indra Pathasarathi, who always travels to the west for taking techniques to give or to romanticize the local plots, the local resources. The resources he collects from the local histories, and he gives a Western tune to that by picking up elements and techniques from the West. In the last words spoken by Aurangzeb in his play Aurangzeb, when he says, "I go carrying a heavy burden of sin. All the waters of Jamuna will not be enough to cleanse my hands of its bloodstains. What was it that induced me to kill so many people? It's not my responsibility to reason why. Only history can answer. The events of my life flash before my eyes. I am old on the verge of extinction. I have myself become a part of history." One can find very close, relationship between this specific passage and the passage where Macbeth was trying to say, "With all Neptune's ocean, if I dip my hand into the ocean, it will turn red." So they jumped into, even in the latest work of Kumari, Anyadi, for which he was awarded the Sahitya Academy. Uh, there were umpteen references to water. There is a separate chapter titled Water Spirit, and throughout the novel you find the indigenous people, the youngsters, using water as part, and it has almost become the blood. It's not just water in the well; it's the blood in their body, in their veins, and they considered it as an integral part of the culture and their life. One specific passage from Anyadi, runs this way. They all jumped into the well, which was near the rivulet, and played catch and run game. They went to the deep, left continuous bubbles, and came out quickly and gazed out. Once Mari found out the bubble as the after effect of the fart inside the water, they bathed till their eyes went red and went behind their donkeys talking. So for centuries, possibly millennia, all over the world, water was shared, for everyone's right to this essential resource was recognized. For thousands of years, legal systems have accepted that running water cannot be owned. Even in the industrialized West, until very recently, water was a shared resource only. People in the first world were expected to pay for the delivery of their water, the upkeep of the system, the building and maintenance of reservoirs and other water storage systems, but the water remained a shared resource. However, over the past half a century, as the world population has increased and water has become increasingly scarce, it has become less and less a shared resource. Even as early as the 1970s, the UN, the UNICEF, the WHO, all these organizations began to highlight the plight of the poor in the third world countries. By 2003, a data says more than a billion people, a quarter of the world's population, had no access to safe drinking water. Every year, more than 5 million people, mostly children, die from waterborne diseases such as dysentery and diarrhea. Global water consumption is now doubling every 20 years and more than twice the rate of population growth. The UN is now predicting that water will become more and more scarce. And the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan was warning the world that the next war will be there for water wars. So the poor in the third world who are already suffering from lack of water will be the worst affected. In 1989, that was the first red signal, that was the first danger. Margaret Thatcher carried out a huge water privatization scheme for the whole of England and Wales. All of a sudden, a precious natural shared resource was taken from the British people, sold off and privatized. By the year 2000, private water corporations operated in 100 countries and 10% of world's water was privatized. Now, you'll be shocked to find 56% of world's water was privatized. And now the World Bank and the IMF are now putting pressure on third world countries to sell off their water to multinational corporations in India in order to reduce their national debt. As in the case of Coca-Cola, which was driven away from Plachimada in Kerala for polluting the groundwater. Once they were driven out of Kerala, they were very comfortably and conveniently given the space to accommodate the South India Bottling Company, just synonymous with the East India Company, on the banks of River Tamirbarani, which exploits 6 lakh liters of water every day for its bottling unit. You have a lot of, again, when you talk about water in Indian literature, you find only a handful of works which dealt with the actual crisis. There is a work, The City of Water by Anvitas and Gupta, and certain romanticization of river in the Golden Boat river poems by K. Sachidananda. Of course, it's an edited volume. And a river called Titash by Advaita Malabarman. Probable exceptions of romanticization of water bodies is The River of Stories by Arijit Sen, a graphic novel where he talks about the connection between the indigenous communities and the river bodies, and how the privatization of water deprive how it deprives the indigenous roots of India. So, and of course, Amitav Ghosh's The Hungry Tide. This is only a basic. This is only a basic, basic thing on which I am trying to construct. I am trying to prepare a whole project on the hydro poetics and hydropolitics, by which I mean the poetics with which the romanticization of water bodies has been accepted by all writers across India. Um, Most of these writers, they constructed the image of a river or the sea or all water bodies only keeping an imagination which is very, very far-fetched from reality. And the actual water crisis and the politics with which the local population is deprived of the one of the most required water resources. These things nobody talked about. Perhaps these things you can find a lot in the regional discourses, in the regional writings. In all regional writings, I could find a lot of references to crisis, a lot of references to the condition, the plight of the poor during the drought situations, and during scarcity, times of scarcity, water scarcity, and the need for preservation of water resources. All such things one can find in the regional discourses, but not in the Indian English writings. Indian writings in English, perhaps partly because these writers were once they start writing something in English, their mind is prepared to cater to the requirements of the Western audience. So they just try romanticizing the water bodies rather than talking about the other side of the water bodies, the rivers and the sea. So this specific problem is an important problem which Indian writings should talk about. Even when the whole world talks about the privatization of water and water-related crisis and discourses related to privatization of water and water crisis. No tales in India, proceeds in the form of resistance. The resistance to privatization of water, the local resistance to construction of dams, the Narmada Bachao Andolan. All these things are not properly given the image or imagination in the Indian writings in English. As you all know, how Brecht was challenging and existing very, very popular Solomon's fable, where two mothers were fighting to own a baby. King Solomon, who was supposedly the wisest king of his times, he wanted to find out who the real mother was, and he ordered to cut the baby into two pieces to be taken by both the mothers. And the real mother was objecting to that specific thing, and he allows the other person to own the baby, and she's very much concerned about the welfare of the baby. But this was very much diplomatically reversed by Bertolt Brecht, which requires attention in the Indian context. He very clearly says in his Caucasian chalk circle, the land is not just for the owners, it is for the tillers. It is for the laborers. It is for the peasant who tills the land and put the land to better use. And water is not for the person who owns the valley, but only for persons, only for the waterers. Water for the valley, for the waterers. So people who put certain things to proper use, the agricultural laborers, the peasants who put all these river water to proper use and feed the entire nation, they should be allowed to share the sweet, perhaps the sweetest source, the sweetest resource, the river water of this land. Again, I take help from Bertolt Brecht, who says in his Galileo Galilei, "Unhappy is the land that breeds no heroes." I just rephrase it to fit in this specific lecture. Unhappy is the nation that breeds no writers to sing the woes of the water crisis. And I conclude my speech by quoting Brecht again. You can make a fresh start with your final breath. But what has happened has happened. And the water you once poured into the wine cannot be drained off again. The water you once poured into the wine cannot be drained off again. What has happened has happened. The water you once poured into the wine cannot be drained off again. But everything changes. Everything changes. You can make a fresh start with your final breath. Thank you so much for the opportunity provided to me to address this specific FDP, the audience of this specific faculty development program on an online platform like this. Thank you so much, Dr. Padu and your team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. A wonderful lecture that, as usual, you discussed a variety of elements pertaining to this hydropolitics and hydropoetics. So we shall go for a few questions. Thank you, sir. Um, there are already few questions, sir. No.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Regarding water, can only be poetry used for study, research, or something else like fiction and other fiction, short story, drama can also be used? I'm Vijay Lakshmi from Amrita University, Coimbatore.
Okay.
If you have any other questions, I can add a few. I can take up a few more questions and answer together.
Okay, sir. So there is another question, sir. Can hydropoetics be read in the light of Tinai perspective as one of the sub-genres of oikopoetics?
So sorry to interrupt. What are the, if it is hydropoetics, what are the terms used for fiction and short stories? Hydro fiction or something like that. I want to know the terms also.
Okay.
I'm Vijay Lakshmi again.
Okay. And there is one more question, sir.
Yeah.
Could you kindly pardon me and tell me the name of the graphic novel concerned with hydropolitics? The novel you mentioned about Ambedkar, I think.
No. It's a different thing. I think she's not referring to that. She's asking about the River of Stories by Arijit Sen.
Yes, sir.
She's referring to the River of Stories by Arijit Sen, which is a graphic fiction. Again, Bhimayana is also a graphic fiction, but it talks about the Mahat Satyagraha, where Dr. Ambedkar led the untouchables to have access to the common well, the public well. Let me respond to the question raised by Dr. Vijayalakshmi. Regarding this terminology, naming the fiction which deals with the hydropolitics, as of now, we can call it hydrofiction. The term hydrofiction is very much in usage, as we have an emerging discipline in literary studies called petrofiction, where the conflict or the impact, directly the impact of oil and oil-related trade on nations across the world, nations which were affected by oil wars, and even nations which were not affected by oil wars, but with the upsurge, with the hike in oil prices, and how it affects the transportation, how it affects the increase in the price of vegetables, and how it affects the common man, the poor people. All these things now people are tracing, and that specific thing has been, you know, brought under a common umbrella term called petrofiction, a fiction which deals with petroleum or oil-related issues. The cities of salt by Mujbur, is another important example. I think it is one of the pioneering works where he talks about, in the cities of salt, where he talks about the oil-related issues, how it exercises, how it impacts the whole, not just economy, but the social, cultural aspects of all nations altogether. You can call it aquatic literatures, but then when we talk about the hydropolitics, I think it would be appropriate to call it hydrofiction, as we have petrofiction already. And what is the other question?
Hydropoetry read
No, let me answer the other question, which is related to the Tinai.
Yes, sir.
I already told you, the regional discourses are very much available. The Sangam classics and the division of land into certain divisions. All these things did have discourses on water. So even our grand old poet of Tamil, Thiruvallur, frequently talks about the preservation of water and the importance of water in human lives. And he gives prominence to water in most of his verses. So throughout regional writings, you find the need to preserve water. And I would rather sum up the whole Tamil discourse as, in regional discourses, there is a kind of water consciousness, and all the writers are very much ecologically conscious, and they were all very much concerned with the consumption and preservation of water as such. And you can find umpteen number of examples across Tamil classics and equally in modern writings as well. I was very much expressing my concern with the Indian writings in English, especially the post-70s Indian writings in English, which dealt too much with very, very unnecessary, trivial domestic issues rather than addressing serious issues pertaining to the LPG model, post-liberalization, privatization, and globalization issues. Perhaps Indra Sinha's Animals People, Amulya Maladi's Breath of Fresh Air, Sonara Jas's The Foreign. Except these things, there should have been an exodus of works from an ever-colonized nation like India. But Indian writers, especially writers who write in English, they failed in this front, I would say.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Vijay Lakshmi Madam asked one more question, sir. Can hydrodrama be used? The term hydrodrama.
No, I prefer the word hydrofiction, and perhaps hydrodrama carries a very euphemistic and a little, you can take it in a very derogatory, because drama is used very ironically as well. When in Tughlaq, when the narrator comes to the stage immediately after the welfare measures announced by Tughlaq for Hindus and Muslims. The Bhagavata, the narrator comes to the forefront and says, the show is over, you can leave now. So the show has a lot of connotations. A similar way, drama also has a lot of connotations. I prefer hydrofiction, an umbrella term, or a term which is very much related with petrofiction.
So there is another question. In literature, water has traditionally been associated with the women or the female, and both seems to have faced the same fate. Is this a valid point to consider? Has this angle been explored in the field of hydropolitics or hydropoetics?
No, this has been discussed enough in feminist studies, especially eco-feminists. Dealt with this specific thing enough. Considering the phallocentric society, considering the geographical space, the nation as mother and all rivers as female. I give you a very practical example. You may consider it as a joke, but it is a practical example which I am giving you. In our own university, we have more than 10 hostels for men and 10 and a few more hostels for ladies, for girls. All the men's hostels have been named after Bharati, Bharatiyar, Valmiki, Tagore, all poets, signs of wisdom, symbols of wisdom. And all the girls' hostels have been named Kaveri, Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, all kinds of rivers. So it is in the male psyche that all kinds of natural resources are used as the male using the female, exploiting the female body. But beyond that, the romanticization of rivers also, the poets found some kind of solace when they are very much suffering from solitary syndrome. When they fly in the air using wingless, the wings of poesy, I think they took solace by comparing nature with women always, comparing moon with women, comparing rivers. Even the structure of a river is compared to the structure of a female body. All these things are there, and all these things are, reread and reinterpreted and deconstructed in postmodern times.
Thank you, sir. So I think we can conclude, sir.
Yes.
So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Padu and your team. And before you conclude, I just use this opportunity not only to thank you all. I wish, because I'm a frequent visitor to your department, you all know, whenever I visit Bharatiya University, I feel it is my home, just like my alma mater, Manonmaniam Sundarnar University. With that ease and comfort, I used to visit Bharatiya University as well. Thanks to the former head of the department, Dr. Saravana Selvan. And I wish, under the leadership of the present head, Dr. Nagaraj, again, you all as a team should continue the legacy set by Professor Saravana Selvan, and you should take forward the legacy with the same vibrancy and meaningfulness with which you all used to plan and organize literary events. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I wish you all a grand success.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. And before that, I wish to assure you that we will continue to move forward with the same kind of legacy. Though there are few difficulties that we faced, actually, that we were into so many other elements, because they emerged unexpectedly. So certain things happened. That is why we are not able to move this program we thought it will be in more better way. No, we planned in some other way, but unfortunately certain things we were not able to make it as usually it happens in our department. And I'm sure that in future endeavors, no, we'll make it as an event that happens in Bharatiya, and usually with the same kind of enthusiasm, with the same kind of arrangements, we'll take care of everything the Bharatiya ways. Thank you for that. And as usual, that you have enthralled with your vast knowledge, that the way that you have organized your lecture, and the way you explained even the minutest things from various literary works, from the regional works, from the European texts. It has been a source of inspiration, as many of our students usually mention you as a source of inspiration for them, because you used to quote from multiple literary texts to explain a concept. And it is the same way that today, I was expecting certain information, and you touched upon the it is such a wonderful organization, and a lecture uh, very much inspirational. And you have shown how what are all the aspects that can be discussed under the topic of hydropolitics and hydropoetics. Thank you very much for this excellent work, sir, excellent lecture. And thank you for sparing your valuable time with us. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kasirajan. Thank you, David. Thank you, Vinod. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.